Come see us on tour. We're going to be in Bakersfield, San Jose, California, Buffalo, New York, Toledo, Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, Glasgow, Manchester, Belfast, Dublin, Liverpool, Birmingham, and London. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. Let's remember that Douglas Murray wrote this book, Neoconservatism and Why We Need It. So
as true today as it was in 2006.
So that's like neoconservatism is what got us the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, the Libyan War, the Ukraine War, the Syrian War. That's called neoconservatism. Okay. And so Douglas Murray, coincidentally, for all those wars, even though he's an expert and he has an accent. So he got his ass handed to him, and he decided to go to the New York Post, he went to the New York Post, which is a joke of a newspaper in New York. But anyway, they don't do not everything they do is bad. And they printed an op-ed by him, and it's called Douglas Murray, so-called Israel-Hamas-Ukraine war experts spew false info on Joe Rogan's podcast. There has to be a standard. So that's just the headline's just a lie, and there is no standard in journalism. There's no standard. There has to be a standard. How about you start with a standard for journalism? Journalism got everything wrong about COVID. They get everything wrong about Russiagate. They get everything wrong about the Iraq War, the Libyan War, the Afghanistan War, and the Ukraine War. They still won't tell people how it started and why. They got everything wrong. Everything. They got the biggest story of their life wrong, COVID. They got ivermectin wrong. They got the vaccine transmission contraction wrong. They got where the virus came from, who funded the virus. They got everything wrong. They got lockdowns wrong. They got masks wrong. There wasn't a thing they didn't get wrong. You know who got it right? Joe Rogan show. Joe Rogan show. You know who got Russiagate right? This show. And you don't have to be an expert to know when someone's lying. You don't have to be an expert to know when the war machine is lying. And all I have to is use my common sense and my BS detector. And so this is the establishment media and the Zionists losing. This is the neocons losing the argument. And so they want to shut people up by saying you don't get it right to say anything. We have to impose some standards. There's no standards when it comes to the establishment corporate journalism. There's zero standards. They lie as they breathe. They lie, but there isn't a thing they haven't lied about COVID. There isn't a thing they didn't lie about Russiagate. There isn't a thing they didn't lie about January 6th. There isn't a thing they haven't lied about when it comes to Ukraine war, the Iraq war, the Libyan war, the Syrian war. The Afghanistan war was 20 years of straight lies, as the Afghan papers reveal. So this idea that the corporate media has some sort of standards is a lie. They lied to you about ivermectin. They lied to you about hydroxychloroquine. There isn't a thing they don't lie about. And they lied to you about Joe Rogan. They colored his face green to make him look sicker than he was when he beat COVID. They lied to you about Dr. Robert Malone. They lied to you about Peter McCullough. They lied about everybody and they smear everybody. The people who are the liars are Dr. Fauci, Peter Hotez, and the corporate media. So he wrote this, and we're just going to go through it. This is what I would call strike 3 for Douglas Murray. So they're scrambling because they know they got exposed. They're scrambling. And so he runs and writes this thing. And again, Dave Smith's big argument on Joe Rogan's show was, engage me in the argument. Quit telling me I'm not an expert. If I'm not an expert, you should be able to wipe the floor with me.
Or teach me something.
So,
Mr. Expert?
Having not spoken to Joe since the wars in Ukraine and Israel started, I'd become increasingly irked that the guests he had on have been almost entirely anti-Ukraine and anti-Israel. Okay, that's not true. Joe's had on plenty of people. Elon Musk. Is there a bigger cuck to Israel than Elon Musk? He's had him on. He had Trump on, for F's sake. 2 of the biggest cucks to Israel in the world.
Rich Voss gave him a paper mat.
Right. He's had on plenty of people. He's also had on Brett Weinstein. He's had on Eric Weinstein. He's had all these people. So and I didn't even. That's just off the top of my head. Oh, how about Gad Saad? He's out on Gaza. That's another guy off the top of my head. 1000% Zionist.
So it's pronounced Ga'ad Sa'ad.
However you name. However,
I don't know how you say it.
So, and so he's just so that's just a lie. He starts off by arguing for people to tell the truth with a huge lie. Many of the latter, in particular, the latter meaning the anti-Israel, are not just vindictively and maliciously anti-Israel, as opposed to the people who are anti-Hamas and anti-Palestine. Okay. But have been spewing claims that are demonstrably false. Well, then show us the claims that they're spewing. Quit saying that's all they do.
I know for a fact Dave Smith ain't malicious, and Ian Carroll, I've never seen him say anything remotely. In fact, they all have qualifiers out the ass before they tell you these things.
That's right. So get back to this. He says, many are also people who are simply in no way expert, is what they are talking about. Well, Douglas, you're not an expert in anything. You have an undergraduate degree in English Lit. And you got every war wrong. You're not an expert on anything. You're wrong about Iraq. You're wrong about Ukraine. You're wrong about, I'm sure. Could you look up, Steph, to see if Douglas Murray, if he was pro-Libya and pro-Syria?
I bet he was.
I'm going to bet 1,000% he was. One of these is comedian who goes by the name of Dave Smith. Why do you want to make people hate you even more by talking in such a condescending manner?
Wait,
he goes by the name. How about one of these is comedian Dave Smith? He goes by the name.
He says he is. Is he suggesting that Dave, like Bibi Netanyahu, has 4 different social security numbers with 4 different names?
Are you suggesting, Douglas, that just like every Israeli prime minister changed their name to sound less European because they're not from Israel? Because they're not from the region? Every Israel prime minister has changed their name. So you don't know that they're actually European and they're not Semites.
Claiming some Jewish
ancestry. Dave, you mean he claimed? You wouldn't say that about anybody else. Claiming some Jew. He doesn't claim. His mother and father are Jewish.
Like Bill Maher?
He has spent Bill Maher is half. Even Bill Maher. He
doesn't meet the rules, but his dad was Jewish, his mom was Catholic. It's like if your mom was Jewish.
Yeah, Dave Smith, more Jewish than Bill Maher. But he would never say that about Bill Maher. He would never say Bill Maher, who claims some Jewish ancestry. He would never say that. Bill Maher's mother, Catholic.
He thinks he's trying to make it like Dave Smith's or Whoopi Goldberg.
Yes, exactly. He has spent the 18 months since October 7th being very unfunny indeed. What? Indeed. You've never been. Have you ever been to one of his comedy shows? Never? You've never been?
Yeah. Have the courtesy to have been to his comedy show. The courtesy.
According to Grok, Douglas Murray has been nuanced when it came to Libya. There's no nuance. So he was wrong about it. His writings and public statements provide insight into his views, often shaped by his broader and the rise of. He's concerned about the rise of Islamism. Let's break it down.
Yes.
He has not directly stated a pro-war stance on Libyan intervention, but critics have accused him of downplaying or whitewashing the consequences of Western involvement. In his book, The Strange Death of Europe, Immigration Identity, Murray discussed the migration waves into Europe, including that were triggered by the Libyan War. Anyway, so he's yes. So specifically, he has decided. This is back to the article. Specifically, Dave Smith had decided to spend his time going around the. By the way, so he's been very unfunny indeed. Have you ever been to one of his comedy shows? You've never been. Wouldn't you at least have the courtesy to attend one of his comedy shows if you're going to opine on his comedy, saying it's unfunny indeed? You've never been. Where's my fainting couch? You've never been to Dave's stand-up shows? Specifically, he has decided to spend his time going around the podcast world sounding off about Israel.
He has a job called podcasting that he made a successful show that people like. You jerk off. Nobody even read your stupid book about why we need neoconservatism. That's why I had to dig it up and repost it now.
In the process, he largely cites people like him. People who have many views but no obvious expertise. Well, I always cite Norman Finkelstein, who's a scholar and a Jew, a Jewish scholar. And I also, Chris Hedges, who's also a scholar, who lived in Gaza, who's been there and reported there. He was Middle East for years and years. That's who I quote all the time. So, again, that's another lie. People like Daryl Cooper, who says he isn't a historian, yet has been invited onto some of the world's biggest podcasts as a historian.
Did someone call him that, and besides Douglas Murray? Because, like, they claim to be experts. I've never heard Dave Smith say I'm an expert.
And in fact, he says quite the opposite.
I'm still not clear on why expert means you can't ask an expert to answer a goddamn question.
That's right.
I thought I'm supposed to have dumb questions, and an expert, because they're not dumb, has the answer.
So here,
I'm not aware of this thing that I can't talk about it.
Well, here's where he punches himself right in the dick as hard as he could. He says, another such figure from the world of comedy who was changing his shape to fit the time as Rogan guest Ian Carroll. So I guess there's no standards at the New York Post because that's a complete lie. Ian Carroll is not from comedy. He's not a comedian.
He sells T-shirts.
He's not a comedian. He's just a podcaster and an Instagram guy and a Twitter guy. That's what he is. He's a conspiracy theorist guy who's very interesting and gets a lot of stuff right. So 100% wrong right there. Where's your standard? Did you even look up Ian Carroll? You've never looked him up? Have you ever been to his website? You've never been?
You never had the courtesy.
Wouldn't you do the courtesy?
Strange.
This is someone who, when he last went on Rogan's podcast, very carefully tried to minimize the evil of Adolf Hitler. He's making that up. That didn't happen. Again.
How did he do that?
So there's no standards. So this guy who wants standards has absolutely no standards and gets everything wrong, even in his article about having standards. He didn't do that.
Ian should never be booked as a comedian again, I say. Outrageously and completely falsely, Carroll claimed that in the 1930s, Hitler had kept his anti-Semitism down. He didn't do that. Ian Carroll didn't do that. Why is he saying? What is?
He's complete. Well, he's conflating what's that guy's name? Daryl Cooper, and he's lying about what Daryl Cooper said. That's not what Daryl Cooper said. I'm not defending or Daryl Cooper. I'm just letting you know that's not what he said.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suspected it wasn't because it's very low on details.
But anyway, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Ian Carroll didn't say that. Doesn't matter. That's not what Ian Carroll said. That's what it doesn't matter. A provable false claim that Rogan did nothing to counter. All these men have also, by the way, there's lots of historians, actual historians, who say that. Anyway, all these men have also been palling around online with Holocaust deniers and proud anti-Semites like Jake Shields. So what is that? What's that called? That's called guilt by association. Again, another smarmy, sleazy, scuzzy, underhanded tactic that is not an argument. That's what people who don't have arguments do. That's what people who get everything wrong do. They use arguments and tactics like that. 2 weeks ago, Rogan... Two weeks ago, Rogan on his mate, Dave Smith, on yet again for a long podcast. They're all 3 hours. All of Joe's shows are 3 hours. Again, but for my return to the show, the deal was that I could come on only if Dave Smith was once again in the studio, as if Joe didn't want to be unaccompanied. No, Joe doesn't have knowledge about the shit you're about to spew, so he brought someone on who does have knowledge.
It's called cutting out the middleman, Douglas. So you could talk directly to the guys so Joe could learn.
So you're upset that Joe doesn't have people on to push back against people, but when he does have someone on to push back against you, somehow that's out of bounds. Isn't that interesting? And you're the expert, so why couldn't you wipe the floor with that non-expert Dave Smith? Because you're not an expert, and you're wrong about everything. There isn't a thing you haven't been wrong about. He might have been right about COVID. I think he might have been right about that, and I think I think he might have been, and he was good in the monk debates when he was with Matt Taibbi.
Mm-hmm.
So, but everything else, he goes, I like a debate, or that Joe thought it was I of all his guests who must be challenged. So Joe should challenge other people, just not me.
But it's really not about you. It was about the Gaza situation.
That's right.
You know, like it wasn't like a thing to get Douglas Murray.
Right.
It was because he thought highly of Douglas Murray too. Well, I guess up until this.
Up until this. I like a debate just as much as the next Scotsman. But what resulted was more than a debate. It seemed to have led to some kind of podcast world meltdown. No, it didn't. It turned out to be you melting down and writing bullshit articles like this, going on Bill Maher lying, and everybody else lying that you did a good job on Joe Rogan when you obviously got your ass handed to you by a comedian because you didn't want to engage in any of the arguments. The meltdown was on your side. So this is again, accuse the other person of exactly what you're guilty of. The first reason was that from the outset, I challenged Joe on his choice of guests and why he had been giving a platform to only one side of a debate, and a very conspiratorial one at that. Okay, we already debunked that. That's not true. He and Smith were immediately defensive, but the real problem came when I raised the issue of expertise. Because as I had said then and have said often, we have lived through a period when the experts have gotten an awful lot of things wrong. Yeah, like everything.
Most of the things.
From the COVID lab leak to the Hunter Biden laptop, we have lived through years after which distrust of experts have become inevitable. So what this is called a limited hangout. So when you're caught, when the experts have been exposed for being liars and wrong about everything, you admit to some of it. And that's what this is. He's admitting to some of it. In order to try to give himself some credibility when he says the next line. Yet that doesn't mean that expertise does not exist. That's called a straw man. No one is claiming that expertise does not exist.
There's no such thing as that, Jimmy.
There's no one.
That's like Bigfoot.
Yeah, straw man. So that's called a straw man. No one's arguing that point. So again, he won't ever engage in actual arguments, and then he creates straw men to argue against. That's one of them. It does not mean that a comedian can simply hold himself out as a Middle East expert. Dave does not do that. That's another straw man. Straw man, wrong about everything. This is the way Douglas Murray argues. And should be listened to as if he has any body of work. Don't need to have a body of work to have an opinion.
His body of work is better than yours, Doug.
That's right. His body of work actually turns out to be better than Douglas Murray's body of work.
His body of work is that we need neoconservatism. But what are you talking about?
It does not mean that someone who says they are not a historian but who practices false history should be cited as a historian. This point seems to rile both Smith and Rogan. You mean that you're making shit up? Yeah.
Practices false history?
It appears.
What does that mean?
Again, quit. All he does is make accusations about what people are doing. He never engages in the arguments. It appears to have riled their audiences even more. Yeah, because if you look at the comment section of Joe Rogan's episode with you, every single one of them hated your guts and saw through you. Because many people seem to think that what I mean is that they are not allowed to have an opinion. That is wrong. I think they are. No, you're wrong.
You're just not allowed to tell anyone.
Yeah, they're not allowed to go on shows and talk about it. You can have an opinion. Just keep it to yourself. Keep it inside. Certainly don't go on a podcast
and say that.
And say it.
The thing you think.
It's just that there should be a price to pay for spreading bullshit. Yeah, and you're paying that price right now because you're the one who spread bullshit about the Iraq war, about the Israeli-Gaza conflict, about Ukraine, and about your debate on Joe Rogan's. You're the one spreading the bullshit, and you're paying a price for it right now. And of course, you do that thing. You accuse the person, your opponent, of the thing you're guilty of.
You know, Jimmy, I would have liked to hear his bullshit about Gaza, and they never got to it.
That's right.
We had to listen to his other bullshit.
And part of that price that you have to pay is that you should be called out. Well, people are calling you out. That's what's happening.
Oh, what a price.
If I had gone on Rogan's podcast and held myself out as an expert in MMA fight, this is the worst analogy ever. I suspect he would have noticed. If I had kept making mistake after mistake and shown ignorance piled upon ignorance, I think he'd say, hey, you don't seem to be very knowledgeable about this, and he'd be right. Yes. Guess what you didn't do? You didn't go on and exhibit your expertise. as Joe would have in an argument with you about MMA. Joe would have exhibited as he wouldn't have to keep saying that I'm an expert and you're not. He would have just exhibited his expertise and revealed you as knowing nothing. You didn't do that to Dave Smith. Dave Smith didn't make a mistake after mistake after mistake, and you weren't because you didn't expose him for making those mistakes, because you're not an expert and you're an expert in being wrong about it. So why is it hard to grasp that something similar applies in other areas? Because that's all bullshit what you just said. If you have expertise, you don't go around telling people I have expertise. You exhibit your expertise and everyone sees it. Just like Brian Regan doesn't have to tell people he's funny. He just goes up and he's funny and everyone sees it. So, in bigger rings and more important fights, having spent most of the last 18 months in Israel, Gaza, Lebanon, and Ukraine, I don't think I know everything. No,
I'm paid not to.
Yeah, because you're paid not to, and you're being dog-walked around Israel and Gaza by the IDF. You're given a Potemkin village view of what's actually happening there. And who are you talking to? You're talking to victims of October 7th. You're talking to the IDF soldiers. Talk to any Palestinians, did you? Talk to anybody from Hamas? But I think I know a darn sight more than someone like comic Dave Smith, who admitted he's never been to the region he spends all of his time talking about.
Wait a minute. I admit I'm not. Why don't you share some of that expertise with us? So, that's what I was hoping.
Again, there's no expertise he's revealing in this. I have
no idea if you know more than Dave, because you didn't tell me any of what you know.
Nothing. Oh, so you have to go to a country to comment on it, do you? Said part of the internet. Again, the answer is obviously not. So he keeps saying two things at once. But if your job, or you're making it your job, then probably yes. So he just contradicted himself. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
Dave because he doesn't have
an argument. And by the way, this isn't Dave's job. Dave's job is being a comedian and hosting a podcast. If I filed columns,
he broke you down for a hobby, dude. It wasn't his job,
right? His hobby, and he was able to run right through you. If I filed columns for this paper pretending to be an expert on countries I'd never been to, I would expect my readers to complain, as they should. If I filed columns about a war zone from the safety of West Palm Beach, I think it would be fraud. Journalism has had its... Okay, no, that's not. He even said himself, there are people who weren't in the Holocaust who have written better about the Holocaust than people who were there. I don't have to go to Vietnam to write about Vietnam. I don't have to go to Nazi Germany to write about it. I don't have to go to Gaza to write about Gaza. This is another straw man.
Hey, you know what? Let's give him that one. My bad. Next time, we'll all go there first. Any thoughts on the actual thing, though?
Any thoughts on the actual thing? Still no thoughts on the actual thing. And by the way, over 200 journalists have gone to Gaza, and guess what? The Israelis killed them.
Yeah, they didn't suffer a podcast meltdown.
That's right. They got killed by the Israelis. Over 200 journalists.
The courtesy to be killed by the Israelis.
Journalism has had its own meltdown in recent years, more limited hangout. But it doesn't mean we don't have standards. You don't have standards. This article is proof there's no standards. You get everything wrong after everything wrong. You present zero argument. You have no standards. This is all you straw man people. You get facts completely wrong. Ian Carroll's not a comedian, and he didn't say the things you said he said.
He's an influencer. That's all he is an influencer.
That's it.
Nothing else. Not an expert.
And you're not an expert on anything. You have an undergraduate degree in English Lit. And as we've learned through Russiagate, as we've learned through COVID, as we've learned through the Ukraine war, journalism has zero standards. It's flat out propaganda. There's a book called Manufacturing Consent by a guy who's actually an expert, by two guys, Edward Herman and Noam Chomsky. And they, before the consolidation of corporate media, they let people know that the media is there not to inform you or give you facts. The corporate media is there to manufacture consent from the governed for the policies of the oligarchs. That's what corporate media, that's why we have a show. That's why Joe Rogan's show is popular. That's why the Gray Zone has a show. Because corporate media has no standards. And they're there to manufacture consent. Much though that might amaze some people, I am amazed that you pretend that corporate media has standards. And if they do have standards, what are those standards? He doesn't tell you. Just like he doesn't argue anything or tell you what Dave Smith got wrong.
Oh, now you're a standards expert?
What the standards are in the new media, especially on podcasts, is being worked out. There are no standards. People get to say what they want. You know what the antidote to bad speech is? More speech. But there must be some. There must be some standards in podcasts. What he's implying there is there must be some censorship. That's how I read that. You might read it differently, but that's what that is. But there must be some kind of censorship on guys like Joe Rogan and guys like Dave Smith and guys like Jimmy Dore. You mean the guys who got everything right during COVID and Russiagate? Yeah. Otherwise, the new media will lead people into errors and evils far greater than the old media could ever dream of. I don't think there's a bigger there's no bigger evil than the Iraq War. There's no bigger evil than the Syrian War. There's no bigger evil than the Ukraine war. And currently, there's no bigger evil than the mass slaughter of children in Gaza. No podcaster ever led to a war that slaughtered a million people. What's that?
Evil's like not bombing Iran on behalf of Israel.
So that's strike 3 for Douglas Murray. And I just couldn't let this article go without debunking it. You have no standards, Douglas Murray. That's why you're allowed to print bullshit articles in the New York Post, because they have no standards. You have no standards. The corporate media has zero standards, which is why shows like this exist.
There was nothing to debunk. He didn't even offer any bunk.
He offered no bunking. There's no argument. He didn't argue an argument.
What are you supposed to debug?
He's just
I shouldn't have to be on with him, Dave Smith.
He's just upset. He's upset that other people get to have opinions on podcasts. That's all he's upset about. And he thinks they shouldn't. But then he says, but that's not what I'm saying. I think they should. But then they should get called out for their bullshit. We'll call them out for their bullshit. What did they get wrong?
Boy, you're really blaspheming. It's very Islamic of him. You know, he goes, I don't need to revisit an argument that's already been settled by experts. That's an Islamic saying. Only a fool goes looking for more knowledge when he already has all the knowledge. That's Douglas Murray being Islamist. In fact, this new Ayatollah of speech ID he's got is also very Islamist.
Hey, I have an urgent retirement warning. Even as Trump stands up to China, billionaires are fleeing Wall Street, including Warren Buffett, who dumped $133 billion in stocks. But I trust the experts at Colonial Metals to help you. So visit colonialmetalsgroup.com/Jimmy-Dore-show or call 888-910-1419 for your free gold guide on how to bulletproof your IRA and 401k with gold tax-free. You could also qualify for a free home safe and as much as $7,500 in free silver. Once again, that's colonialmetalsgroup.com/Jimmy-Dore-show or call 888-910-1419. Come see us on tour. We're going to be in Bakersfield, San Jose, California, Buffalo, New York, Toledo, Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, Glasgow, Manchester, Belfast, Dublin, Liverpool, Birmingham, and London. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.